Okay. Look at my hair. Do you see how none of it's falling out? Yeah. You see? I mean, it's thin on top. But so anyway, I've been in the salon for about 30 minutes at this point. She's washed it and dried it and blew it dry. And then she starts asking me about the church. So I go into my normal spiel of, well, you know, our church is planted here because there's a concentration of GLBTQ kids in college. And there's been a rash of suicides because of the pain. You lose your family, you lose your church, you lose your dorm roommate. And she says to me, oh, so you welcome gay people in your church? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, you know they're an abomination. And I said, well, actually, no, ma'am, they're not. And I start talking, and I can tell right away that she is not changing her view. And then she says to me, well, I'll do your hair today, but just so you know, you're probably going to hell for letting fags in your church. So I got up and I walked out. That was probably not the best of plans because I had chemicals in my hair. So I'm driving down the road, and I don't know Hattiesburg very well yet, so I'm trying to call a salon that knows how to rinse this shit out. And I'm sitting there and going, okay, what do I do? So I decided to call my husband Larry because anytime something crazy happens, it's a phone call from me. So I'll call him and I'm like, honey? And he says, yeah. And I said, will you still love me if I'm bald? And he's like, what did you do? And I said, well, I had the hair straightener in and the chemicals and I lived and they're bigots. And he says, yeah, I still love you. We're going to get you a wig or maybe you can get a tattoo. So I'm driving down the road and I got the windows down and the air's rushing over my hair because it's burning now. And I'm smoking my cigarette and I'm looking at my smartphone and I'm like, hair straightener, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And I called 3 salons and none of them were open because it was a Monday and there was like this weird salon rule that you can't be open on a Monday. So I'm like, shit, these bigots are going to be the only salon that's open in Hattiesburg. And finally, I'm looking at my phone and I found this one place. I mean, it didn't even have a name. It was like extensions, braids, and hair straighteners. And this lady picks up. And I'm like, hi, I was at a salon and I was using this F450. It's like this super fabulous hair straightener. And like, it's in my hair and I left because they were bigots and my hair's going to fall out. And she was like, baby, you just come on in here. So I'm driving and she's literally, like I said, I don't know Hattiesburg, so she is talking me through every turn. And when I finally get there, she says, well, I can't charge you because the last step is washing it out. And I said, so I've been driving around for 40 minutes like a crazy person. I could have gone to 2 minutes home and wash my hair. And she's like, well, yeah, but then I wouldn't have had this fabulous story. And then she looked at me and she said, and you know, my son is transgender. And you know, and that was nice too. It was nice to have a connection and for her to know that somebody in Hattiesburg cares enough to leave a salon when there's bigotry. So it was a really nice moment. I mean, I did not enjoy it.
Okay. Have you ever done something for the purpose of like proving you can do it or like being able to tell the story later? Well, I mean, like that's the thing with it's kind of like saying I hunted a whale, like a white whale in a sense. Like it's almost a urban legend, but the one thing that makes it funny is the story is actually true. Like you know what I'm getting at? No? Okay. A lot of people say they can deep throat a 9-inch cock. I can actually deep throat a 9-inch cock. It's not a theory. I proved it to my boyfriend, to the other guy, and to myself. You know what I mean? It's not like a myth. It's a fact and something that I was kind of like, I thought about it later. I was like, well, why did I go through with that, you know? But, you know, especially like after the incident that occurred. Okay, so here's how the story starts. So Luke and I, we were at our friend James's house, and we were on Grindr, and we were like, oh, we're really horny, let's have a 3-way, it'll be fun, right? So we get online, and we find this really cute twink guy, like skinny, tall, you know, like really attractive. And I'm like, and he's like, oh, I'm a bottom, and we're like, perfect! So we put James to bed, we put him to a nap, and we were like, we go over this guy's dorm, and like, you know, and like, he goes to like, I think, Ryder, and so anyway, he's really attractive, and he looks just like he does in his pictures. And so, you know, we're like, yes, and, you know, we're like, okay, we start fooling around, and it becomes apparently clear, almost immediately, he ain't no bottom. Like, his whole behavior is like toppish, you know, and I'm like, well, that's what we were thinking. We were like, really, girl? Really? So you know, like, what am I gonna do? Like, oh, okay, we'll put it in. You know, I don't work like that. So, anyway, so we're fooling around, and you know, we sort of start giving each other oral, whatever, and like I start like, you know, I start getting really bored because this isn't going in the direction I want it to go in, and like, I'm not gonna get what I want out of it, and Luke's not gonna get what he wants out of it, so we're kind of like communicating like, you know. The kid is like really nice, you know, so we don't wanna just like leave, so I'm like, okay, I know how to finish this. Now, his dick is enormous, and I'm talking like in every sense of the word, like it's long, it's thick, it's full, it's a beautiful instrument. Like if it had been in a porno, it would have brought all the girls to the yard. It's that sort of thing, you know? And so like, you know, it's just, so I identify myself as a top verse, and I say top verse for a reason, because I'm not one of those guys who like to bottom very often, and when I do, it's usually with a guy who, you know, I have that special connection with. So he's not topping me, and he's not topping Luke, because Luke is only a top. So I'm like, okay, how are we gonna do this? And like, I figured, all right, well, I'm just gonna have to give him oral. So I'm like, honey, I got this, because Luke gagged. So I was like, I got this. So, you know, I start to go to town on it, you know, and at first, I'm like, you know, really shy about it, and then I start getting really like, you know, feeling real more confident, like, you know, stretching those throat muscles, so to speak, and then I like start really like, you know, it's going really very well, and I'm like, you know, I'm doing this, I'm like actually doing this, and like, I guess all those years in Texas really paid off, huh? So anyway, so I'm like giving this guy like really deep head, and like his dick is huge. Like I'm guessing it's like 9 inches. I'm just saying because it's my initial. I mean, I don't really have anything to compare it to, but like I've been with guys who are like I'm 8, I'm 9, but they were never that big, you know? And like I'm thinking, well, either they were lying or this guy's a dinosaur. So I'm thinking they're lying because. So, like, I'm really, like, giving this guy, like, really deep throat, and, like, and I'm doing it, like, actually doing it, and, like, without gagging, without, like, I'm doing it, and he's loving it, and I think I was loving that he was loving it, you know, and so I was maybe getting into it sexually, maybe for that reason, but it takes forever because his dick is so big, and the bigger the dick you have, the longer, or maybe it's a stereotype, or maybe it's a generalization, but like the longer it takes to come, the bigger the dick you have. So like, you know, so I'm tired, my lips are tired, my throat is like, I'm gonna have a sore, like, I'm totally gonna have tonsillitis tomorrow for sure. Is that kind of, so, you know, so, he looks like he's almost done. Like, you can see in his face, like his whole body language is saying he's gonna come soon. So I'm like, you know, thank God, you know? And so I'm doing this one move where I'm like slowly, like I'm slowly sliding it down my throat. Like, I'm not like, you know, ramming it in there. Like, I'm not shoving it. I'm like slowly really elongating it out, you know? And then, this motherfucker, because that's what he was after he did this. He goes to the back of my head, and I'm like, okay. So I've seen this in porno, and it can be hot, and like, you know, I've done it to other bottoms I've been with, and like, you know, but it's usually been prearranged. But you know, I'm not like whatever. I'm above average, but I'm not this guy. I'm not like big whale shark boy, you know. So he does this to me, and I gag. And when I gag, I don't just gag. There's sort of this like lingering smell, you know, like this sort of like acidy feeling you get when you burp a little too hard. I threw up on his cock, but not like full out. Like I didn't paint it. I'm not painting it, you know. It's just like a little bit. But there was like the smell of like vomit. It was like really like. So anyway, so I'm standing there, and Luke is standing there, and this guy's just standing there, and he's like. Goes and rinses himself off, and I go rinse my mouth out, and we're all kind of sort of standing there like, okay. Thing is, he's still hard. Like, he's as hard as a rock. Like, he's as hard as this table. And I'm like, what is going? You know, and I look at Luke, and I'm like, does he think I'm gonna finish it? And like, he starts doing this thing where he's like, you know, gesturing with it, you know? And I'm like, And Luke is like, you know, he's like, well, we can go if you want. And I'm like, no. I started this, I put my mind to it, I'm gonna make this guy come. So, I get back on my knees, and I grab his hands, I glue them to the side of his thighs so he doesn't make any more gestures, and I finish him, and he comes like a rocket. And then after that, it was like, got dressed, nice to meet ya. And after that, I hated him. I hated him for that whole head slapping thing, and I was just like, well, I hope you enjoyed that, because you're probably not gonna get another guy to deep throat your huge ass cock again, because I ain't coming back. So we go outside, and I am furious, I'm like, and Luke is like, calm down, it'll be okay, I'm like, no, that motherfucker, he said he was a bottom, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like really freaking out on Ryder campus, but no one's staring because it's like a Saturday night and no one's there. But but I'm really having it. And Luke's like, look, I know what'll make you feel better. Pull out your phone, call out Matt, who's my best friend, and tell him about the whole story, and you'll feel better. And I said, okay. So I pulled out my phone, I call my best friend, I tell him the whole story, and he goes, girl, you slut! And I lost it, and I died telling the story. I died when the story was done, and I just felt so much better.
From May 31st, 2011 to February 23rd, 2013, I walked 6,000 miles across the USA from Seattle to Washington, D.C., and my mission was to end gender and sexual orientation discrimination. And as fantastical as that sounds, what I learned was the real story of the walk was found in the stories of people I met along the way. So what you're hearing tonight are some of those stories. You're also hearing stories of people who followed me every step of the way, and you're hearing some stories from people I met as a result of walking.
Well, the night before we found out about this conference called Coming Out, a Gospel Response to the Homosexual Lifestyle. Okay, coming out. I had 2 crisis calls the night before, so I didn't get to bed until about 6 a.m. And at 8 a.m., my phone is ringing off the hook with people from our church saying, have you seen this crap? So Larry and I go on the website, and what was interesting is the marketing that these 3 churches and Refuge 46 used. The marketing from the outside was very loving if you didn't know what you were looking for, and they were very careful not to use the words conversion or reparative therapy. So Larry and I are looking at this, and we are getting all kinds of pissed off, and we start looking at this Refuge 46 ministry. We'll call it a ministry. It's not. Basically, this Baptist pastor, he was having homosexual affairs on the down low, and he got caught and outed and subsequently lost his job. So he decided that the Holy Spirit could save him from the sin and the clutches of homosexuality. And he married again and created this little cash cow, where he goes all through the South preaching at churches and conferences and telling people how he can turn them from gay to straight through the power of the Holy Spirit. Well, Larry and I, as I said, were pissed. And within 2 hours, we got our whole organization together, which was basically our church. So it was myself and Larry and Sarah Bell, who runs the Campaign for Southern Equality, and Courtney Harding, our intern. And the thing is, if you're not in the thick of it, this all just looks like ignorance. And you can kind of roll your eyes and say, well, those people are fucktards. But when you're answering crisis calls every night from kids who think that if they're good enough and if they pray hard enough and if God loves them enough that they're going to fundamentally change who they are, these conferences, they kill kids. They kill them. So while we wanted to take, pitchforks and torches and go burn the church down, we decided that we would be a presence at that conference for the full 3 days. We wanted to be the first thing a kid saw when they were getting drug into that conference, and the last thing they saw when they got pulled out at night. And what's interesting is activism groups in the South, they don't really share well. They're very insulated and secular. And it's a problem everywhere, but in the South, I think it's magnified. On Main Street, USA in the South, you don't see equality. So we had all these groups together. We had Omega Mississippi, which is a new grassroots group, which is doing amazing things. We had Get Equal Mississippi. We had everyone, the secular humanists, the Unitarians, and we all were working together. We shared meals. We stood in the mud and got eaten by fire ants. And there was never a question of who's going to take credit. And the thing that I found as I'm getting older, and Lord knows I'm getting old, activism is so much more powerful and beautiful when we remove that desire to take credit. When we remove the ability to take credit for it, because it's not about taking credit, it's about saving lives. Reaching that 14-year-old, or that 20-year-old, that 16-year-old, or that 70-year-old, which is a story for later, and saying, God designed you, and you weren't a mistake to begin with. The only mistake that can be made is to not live authentically. And the response we got was amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing.
Tell me about as you were leading into the actual love affair, with the pastor, who was the pastor, and he directed stuff towards you, and what did he say?
I have to look up his name for you, because Freud, he had some good, I didn't particularly care for Freud in college, but he had some good points. I forget the names of people I don't like. So, I don't know his name, I'm gonna have to look it up for you, but this pastor, he came from Lakeside Church, and he got on our Facebook page and led a 45-minute sermon telling his congregation, beloveds, dear beloveds, we are fighting a war against the forces of darkness. I mean, oh my God, he called us forces of darkness. And I mean, when we watch this video, and by the way, it is extremely hard to watch because it is 42 minutes of bigotry, he called his congregation to war 33 times. He said the word battle 46 times. He portrayed us basically as a devil's army. My mom. Growing up, I always wanted to do whatever, My dad was never in the picture, so there's not much to say about him. He found out when I was 16 from my grandmother that I was, at the time, a gay person. And he pretty much disowned me and wanted for me to have nothing to do with him, which wasn't a big deal because he was out of my life at the age of 2. I started my transition at 28. And it was about a year, it was about a year later until I told my mother, and I did tell her on the phone because I was too afraid to tell her in person. And I had the most opportune time when I was in Vegas because she looked at me and she said, "You don't look like my little boy anymore. You look like my little girl." And I should have been like, yeah, well, Mom. But, I didn't want to ruin our time. We were having fun. So I just put it aside. I didn't tell her until a later time. But growing up, I always wanted to make my mom happy. I mean, do good and get good grades. Best I could. I wasn't the best student up until junior year here. I had above the average. I worked a full-time job to pay for all my things, my show choir, all the things I wanted to do. And it got to this point where it felt like no matter what I did, she wasn't 100% happy. She always wants more. That's more than I am, I guess. Which I like that she's a pusher, I do. But sometimes it's just like, she can't accept where I am right now. When I finally did tell her about my transition, she didn't understand it. She's not from here, she's from Vietnam, so she didn't understand the wording. And it wasn't until, she likes her Vietnamese opera. And she was listening while watching this singer, Cat something. And she's also transgender.
And in her opera, she was talking about her struggles, her life, and all that she's been through. And my mom was watching, listening to this opera, and she called me. And she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize what you've been going through, all that you went through." And I didn't understand the wording before, but now hearing in Vietnamese and getting a better understanding of it that way, now it makes sense to me. But she is still my mom, right? Let's get that straight. She still has things she's got to work out. In her mind, I'm still her little boy. When I'm with her, I'm her daughter. But on the phone, I'm still her boy, which sucks in a way. But my mom is older, so I know one day she'll come around. And actually, she never says anything about it when she's with me. So she does accept it. She just doesn't fully understand it. Since I've transitioned, actually, my mom and I have gotten really close. We talk on the phone every single day. There's not a day that goes by that we don't speak about what's going on. And it's more like we're friends, actually, than mother and daughter, I'd say. Which is really great because I'm a big support for her. Anytime she needs anything, or she needs to vent, she knows she can call me because I'm there to support her. And the thing is, like she feels out of all of my siblings, and out of all of her grandkids. She doesn't feel like she has any grandkids except for a few, and she doesn't feel like she has any kids except for one. So because I want to and enjoy contacting my mom, and because I realize all that she's been through, all that she went through to give us a good life. I don't know. I love my mother to death, and the sacrifices that she's made, I don't regret anything that she has done in my life.
I used to go on Sunday nights to this place called The Park. Do you know it? It's on 10th Avenue and 16th Street. It's not a park, it's a place. I think it used to be like an old parking garage from the 20s, so the sign says park. I may be terribly wrong there too, but anyway, it's like a big club, and anyway, I used to go out there. They had like an open bar. If you're getting the picture, I used to be like, which is funny because they had this open bar, which I thought was great, and I would have my, scotch on the rocks or whatever, and then they changed it to open bar Cosmos only, and I was like, fucking hate Cosmos, and I hate sweet drinks, and fucking homos and their fucking Cosmos, like I wanted, but I was like, that's what's free. Oh, which is amazing now because, I was so fucking angry because I had to go to this open bar to get drinks I didn't want. I was quite confused in those years. Anyway, so I would go to this place, and one night I met this gorgeous man. His name was Abbas, but all I ever called him to my friends was the Palestinian dermatologist, because he was of Palestinian descent and he was a dermatologist. And he had leather pants on, and he was super sexy. And so I went home with him, and he was he had this cocaine habit, this huge cocaine habit, which, you know, I enjoyed, but I didn't have any way to get it because then I would have a problem. So what I would do rather than having a drug dealer was I would call Abbas, my Palestinian dermatologist friend, and I would go over to his house and have sex all night long in order to use cocaine. Oh, but it wasn't just about the sex. I mean, because he, well, I love strippers. I guess this is really getting into a good story. So I love strippers. Love them, love them, love them, love them. I'm even part of a secret Facebook group on the interweb called Exotic Male Dancer Fans. But you can't just join. You have to be added, as I was. Which is funny because, I mean, I don't love them as much as I used to, but, you know, I'll always have a soft spot. I love a fucking skanky whore on stage. Truly. Anyway, I don't know how that came up with the boss, but it must have at some point. Because he was like, oh, I wanna give you a lap dance. And I was like, ooh, okay. This is amazing. We're doing cocaine, we're in your apartment, and you're like, he didn't even have a stereo. He had one of those, you know, channels on the television where you, whatever, you know, it says music choice or whatever, you know? And I was like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? Well, a lot of things, but, so he, I remember this. This is all getting to the rape, mind you. This tells you how I was. This tells you how I was living. So the first time he gave me this like lap dance, there was cocaine, as a favorite comedian of mine pronounces it, and he was like, you know, oh, you have to sit on your hands for the first 3 songs, and I was like, ooh, so cool. But I love that he put on, you know, like, and I remember his Music Choice television station was playing music by Madonna. But you know, it was hot, you know, and he had like a leather jockstrap on, and he started stripping, and then he gave me this. I was into it, and yeah, and then I fucked him. And anyway, this went on for a while. I mean, this is Abbas, my Palestinian dermatologist friend, and you know, he had other friends, and we'd call them over and stuff like that, and there would often be like these long, you know, some group action during these long nights because, you know, you're gonna be up for a while, you know, and yeah, and I mean, I don't know, I mean, I was only hanging around him for the drugs, so, I mean, he was very sexy, but I really couldn't stand him. I mean, but that's how I was living, you know? So anyway, he would go, I would go with him occasionally to these places that were like gross to me. I'm not like talking about seedy places like the Cop, like that's not gross to me. I'm talking like bougie, nasty places. Like there was this one place in the meatpacking district called APT. It stood for apartment. Oh dear God, what a vile place. But I would go, we did coke in the bathroom, and he had this one friend, I don't remember his friend's name, but he was also Arab or something like that, and he had like this hawk nose, that I remember, and he had kind of bad skin, which I thought was ironic because he was friends with a dermatologist. And, you know, and he would often be part of these, like, some of these, like, long nights. Yeah, and I don't know how or why, but we must have left Abbas's place together, he and I, which was in Bank Street in the West Village. And then we must have gotten in a cab and gone back to his place, which was in Gramercy. And that's when, you know, fooling around some more. But I was maybe not feeling like, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a good idea to go back there with just him, and then he got on top of me, like he was gonna fuck me. And I was like, no, I don't really feel like that. And I remember, he didn't say anything anymore. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Stop it. He was kind of like, incommunicado. And there was a point where I was just like, well, I guess this is gonna happen. But I don't know. Maybe because I was fucked up, or I don't know why. He was certainly bigger than me, as I recall it. But I also didn't. I certainly didn't. I actually didn't try to get aggressive and force him off of me. I figured once by saying what I didn't want and telling him to stop it didn't work, I just let it happen. I guess that's why in my mind, I'm like, well, is that rape? I certainly feel like I let something happen that I didn't want to happen. But it's funny because of the whole circumstances that I just told you about that led up to it, and the way I was, and that whole time. It felt like a violation, but not a violent act. It was almost like it was almost part and parcel. I think I even crashed there for a minute after. It was almost morning anyways. And I remember stumbling out of there later on and, being like, Gramercy? Where am I? That's fancy. And going to a diner or a deli or something and getting a bagel, and at the time I was living in Williamsburg, so walking down 3rd Avenue, going to the L train and being like, well, I guess I'm not going home with that guy again. But yeah, it's funny. I could use that word. It's a showstopper. But I don't feel entirely right using that word. Because of stories I've heard of, women being raped, there's an actual violence there, But at the same time, it was a time in my life where I looked back and I said no. I said stop it, and then it just happened. So, it was a violation. It's funny because, everyone in that entire little group, in that Coke Den on Bank Street was violating and using everybody else. So it's it's kind of muddy, those waters.
I dated Adrian for 3 months. He and I have the most crazy, epic story, and I've only told a couple of people the entire story in its entirety, but so I guess I can tell you the whole thing. Adrian killed himself in 2003,
And he and I went to high school together in Twin Falls, Idaho. And let's see. Well, we rode the school bus together in junior high, and then we had an art class together our first year of high school in 10th grade. And, you know, we kind of flirted back and forth, but I had a boyfriend. And I guess I kind of liked Adrian a bit, but I felt a lot of pressure from my family and from the community to really date my boyfriend, who I went to church with. And it was like we were supposed to get married, and you know, we were so young, but that's really what it felt like, and that was kind of my plan. And so, you know, I hadn't dated a whole bunch, and then one day I went over to Adrian's house after school, and he pretty much forced himself. I mean, we made out, but then he forced himself on me. And so the first time that I had sex, I was raped by Adrian. And you know, I kind of played the whole thing off, though, and I didn't cry. I was really pretty stoic about the whole thing, and I don't think I really even had words for it at the time. You know, I didn't think of it as rape. I just thought of it as really kind of painful, unenjoyable sex. Like, that didn't quite work. And I felt this incredible guilt because, you know, I had this boyfriend who I was maybe supposed to marry someday, and, you know, like we were the Christian kids. We went to church together and youth group and blah, 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 and I guess Adrian was kind of a little bit more of an outsider at school. You know, in some ways he was sort of like the stoner, and I was a little bit more on the popular side, I guess, from the outside looking in. And, you know, like my parents had money and stuff like that, so I avoided Adrian for the rest of high school. And then I moved back in with my folks in 2003 after I had gone to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I had bought a house out there with my boyfriend, and we had lived there for 5 years, and then we broke up, and I slipped a disc, and I just kind of had this come apart. And I was really depressed, and I had a couple suicide attempts myself. And so I moved back to Twin Falls to kind of put myself back together, and I ran into Adrian. I don't even remember exactly where I ran into him, but I was drinking. I was drinking almost every night, and I was living with my parents and sort of like half-assed looking for a job. And, you know, Adrian was really depressed too. And he had never left Twin Falls except for, I think, like 6 months. He said he went to LA. But so then we ended up dating in 2003. But he got progressively strange around me. And he had this obsession with guns. And he would tell me that he could see things like monsters. And you know, I could tell that he wasn't insincere to these visions, and you know, so I think he might have been schizophrenic. I'm not sure, but God, and you know, I think if I hadn't been so depressed, I think a lot of the people that had dated Adrian previously, you know, they very quickly got out of the relationships, but I spent 3 months with him, and then at some point, you know, I broke up with him, and he ran over a mosaic table that we had made together for his mom, and he ran it over in my driveway, and that, it really scared me. And so I called the women's hotline to ask for help and advice. You know, what do I do about an abusive boyfriend? And you know, do I call the police because you know he's threatened to kill me and kill himself? And you know, we've both had these suicide attempts. And so then one night he came to my house, and this was after sending me tons of threats and notes and phone calls, and he was knocking on the door, and I told him to go away. And so he came around to the back, the sliding glass door, and I told him, I said, "Adrian, fuck off!" And he kept, "Adrian, fuck off!" And then he must have gotten in his car and shot himself. And you know, I'm not quite sure of the timeline, because that was 11 o'clock midnight on Saturday night, and then Sunday morning he had shot himself in the head with a shotgun in his car. And but when we met back up in 2003, and when we dated again, you know, he was just like a very small kind of fey-looking fellow, and he loved rock, like heavy metal music, and he had this long hair, kind of like I'm trying to think who he had hair. He had hair like Van Halen, and part of me thinks he would hate it if he heard me say that, but yeah, he was just sort of this like fairy metal guy, and I think a lot of people wondered if he was gay. And you know, everybody always in Twin Falls was trying to figure out what his ethnicity was. Because I mean, I think he was Italian, but I don't even know all of what his background was. But he was just very like dark, gorgeous hair, just like a really handsome human, and high cheekbones, and I think he might have even had some Native American in him. Just like a really unique looking person. And I think he got a lot of shit for that. You know, he had a hard time in life for a lot of reasons, but you know, we talked, and I told him about liking girls and coming to terms with that, and he told me, you know, because I never realized that in high school and even as an adult, he was given a really hard time, like really harassed for his looks and his ethnicity and his feminineness, and just like perceived, yeah, I don't know. I was really, really angry for a long time. Like angry at his parents, and angry at the community, and you know, angry at him for killing himself. And now I'm still confused and sad, but I kind of feel like I've forgiven him. I still kind of feel angry at the community, I guess.
I do mental health counseling, and it's always really difficult for me to talk about myself. I come from a really interesting background. I mean, my parents' divorce was sloppy. My dad wanted to hang himself in front of us. I mean, he had the rope set up and everything. I was the one that had to hide the rope. I was 10. So that was an experience. I was like, okay. And it's interesting because I actually did have a friend who did commit suicide. They don't really know the reasons why he did it. They think it was because of his ex-girlfriend. He was in his closet for a good 8 hours before anybody actually found him. And I remember when I got the call, I was in my room, and my mom called me and she said, "Kevin hung himself." And at first I thought, okay, well, he hung himself, and this is something that they're going to take him to the emergency room for, and then we can help him through this. But a few minutes later I got the call. This was around 4:40, 4:50, on March 25th, 2007. And my mom said, yeah, he passed away. And I really can't describe that feeling. I mean, it felt like someone kicked me in my stomach and punched me in my throat. I've actually been there where I wanted to kill myself. Twice. I was 12 or 13 at the time. The reason why I felt this was because I didn't know my place in the world. Like, I knew that I liked boys, and I thought that I liked girls. And everyone at school, they were calling me a fag, and even my home life, my stepfather, he would call me a faggot. He would call me a faggot, and one time he went through my stuff and read these letters that I had wrote to a friend, and he saw that I called him a fucking asshole in them. And I came home from school one day, and he stops me and says, "Oh, you think that I'm a fucking asshole? Well, you're not gonna get any privacy." So I wasn't liking life at home. I hated life at school. And I remember having that knife in my hand and thinking, you know, just push it in, and all of this will go away. I don't really know what stopped me, but I'm glad that I did. I think with me, the reason why I'm at this place in my life that I am choosing to go into mental health and choosing to help people comes from all these hurtful experiences that I've had. I mean, my friend committed suicide on March 25th. So, March 25th, it's like my personal appreciation day. I make sure to tell people that I care about and people that I love that have done things for me. I make sure to tell them on March 25th, that is the day. Because this was an eye-opening experience. I learned that people leave your life, and then there's people who choose to leave your life. So I went through therapy, which I went through therapy because it was this extra credit thing for my micro counseling class, but I got a lot more out of it than just the 10 extra bonus points. I learned my place in this world. I learned that my place in this world is to help people and to care for people. It starts with you. I mean, if you don't, who's going to start it? So just living that life has helped me live a more promising and fulfilling life. It's like I tell my clients, it's the resilience that you show. Your strength doesn't come out during the rough times. Your strength comes out after the rough times. Because, you know, you're fighting and you're struggling and you're dealing with all this mess. But once you get through it, that's when your true colors shine. So I think what I want people to get from this is that I don't sweat the little things. I don't go a day without being grateful or thankful for something or someone, because you really don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you're not guaranteed tomorrow. You're not guaranteed 10 minutes from now. You just have to live your life and just be grateful for it.
Some severe safety concerns leading up to the action. I mean, our church is small and it's gay affirming and it's wonderful, but it's also in our home. So when this pastor from Lakeside started, waging war against us with his congregation, he gave them my name and the name of our church. So he also gave them our home address. So we went ahead and we made our Facebook page private. And you could just tell he knew we weren't going to budge, and I think it was making him angry, because I think his whole goal was to get us riled up and angry enough that we would act out so he could say, "Well, see there now, I told you they were terrible and they were evil." And just he actually started calling people from our church, and he actually called me one day before the action and invited me to have lunch with him. And I said, "No, thank you so much." And he told me that any church that has a woman as a leader and filth as a congregation isn't a church at all. And that we were false prophets leading abominations to hell when they think they're going to heaven. And his name is Pastor Randy Cofield. Randy Cofield. And just those 3 days, we actually had one of the girls that organized with us, Sarah Bell, her mother actually went to that conference and stood there, and we actually had signs that said, "Hi, Mom." You know, leading up to it, we had so many threats, and I don't think they knew that we knew what we were doing. I mean, we went ahead and called the sheriff's department and asked if we need a permit, because we were in the county and not the city itself, you didn't need a permit. Yay, Mississippi! When we went and called the sheriff's department, I think they were shocked that we were actually intelligent people. I mean, all they had been told was that we were a violent subculture group, and we're there asking them if we need a permit or a liaison, and you know, the threats that came towards us via our website and the Facebook group and YouTube, they were much more on par with something you'd see in a much larger city.
And what would you say would be on par with like what you see in a larger city?
The mob mentality. The mob mentality that you find in places like New York and last summer's gay bashing. I don't want to say trend. I don't want to give it that sort of credit. But we're dealing with kids in rural Mississippi. You just don't see that kind of thing in the South. I mean, because everybody knows everybody. You don't want to look like an ass. Because 30 years from now, everyone's going to remember what you did and remember you looking like an ass. So no, I think it was much more like a mob mentality.
Tell me a little bit about, during all of this, you were going through your own personal health battles.
Ass cancer! Woo! And I don't even smoke out of my bum. What is that?
So how did that all impact? I mean, how did you deal? I mean, come on.
Well, I had to schedule when I could go to the bathroom. Didn't want to have any accidents. I mean, I was sitting there like, do not crap your pants. You've done all this work. The press is here. Do not crap your pants. Health-wise, I was more tired. Couldn't stand as much as I wanted to. But the energy there was so loving and kind and far-reaching. And I had more energy those 6 days than I think I had since my surgery. It was really amazing. There was just so much love, and we were just exploding with it.
But you weren't exploding with it.
Oh my God, no, I was not exploding with it. I had no accident.
Good. Can you tell me about this 7-year-old man?
So it was the first day of the conference, and conference is letting out, and we're sitting there and we're waving and we're holding our signs, and these conferences are focused on the young GBLTQ adult. That's what these conferences are focused on. And we're sitting there, and up pulls this little truck, and out hobbles this little tiny little 76-year-old gray-haired man, and he hobbles on over to us and starts talking. And when you have an action like this, we have what we call peacekeepers. We don't want to talk to anyone that can be viewed as a physical or a verbal threat. So there were, 5 peacekeepers, and I was one of them. We are the only ones out of the 50 or 60 people there that can talk to anyone viewed as a physical or verbal threat. So this man starts talking to us, and he's telling us how he used to live a homosexual lifestyle. And he's married now, and he's happy, and he was sort of trying to get us to understand that being heterosexual was easier. He was telling us how he felt far from God, and I turned to him and I said, "Sir, nobody here cares who you're sleeping with. We just want you to know that you're loved." And then the tables sort of turned. And he looked at me and he said, "You mean you're telling me that God loved me even when I was gay?" And I said, "God loves you now that you are gay." And I shouldn't have said it. I should have really measured my words, but it just sort of came spilling out. And I was like, he designed you, and he knows your future, and he knows your past, and he loves you and wants you to feel loved. And then this man starts telling us how he just felt far from God, and how, he is married and happy now, but maybe he wouldn't have gone through all this therapy. Maybe he wouldn't have gone through all that if he'd known that there were people here who would love him and care for him and support him. And at the end, we're all crying and we're all hugging him, and then he gets back in his car with his 70-something-year-old wife, and it just kicked us in the gut. Because we're here focused on the young, and this man is hurting. This is a 70-year-old man.
And how long have you been married?
He got married 17 months ago.
said to me, since I was 2, if you had said, do you want me to dress you up like your mommy? I would have been like, yeah, hell yeah. And I used to even do this unabashedly in front of my parents. Like, I would put on my mom's kind of clothes, and I would go walk around and be like, well, isn't this just the bee's knees? And, oh, why is everyone looking so? And I don't even think they were ashamed or embarrassed. I think they just applauded any form of creativity. As a child, I liked getting into my mom's makeup. I wasn't one of those queens who was like, ooh, as a kid I couldn't wait to get into my mom's makeup and, knew what they were doing and became this famous makeup artist. I don't know shit about makeup. Really bad at makeup. Like, I'm not a makeup queen. But, I just loved it, makeup and girly products and stuff. And, when I was maybe 13 or 14 or 15 and I started doing community theater, we went to a cast party once and there was this wig. And I remember I grabbed the wig and I just pearl necklace and a coat and just like, any scrap of drag I can find. And I was like, even Thelma and Louise might could grab a scarf and wrap it around my head, I was in drag for a second, or like a headscarf, and sunglasses, and I felt like a queen. And I think that's how you know. If you have drag in your bones. But I never had the opportunity to do it. I've always loved drag queens. From the moment I've ever seen one. I don't remember the first time I saw one, but I do know that when I was maybe 13 or 14 and I started meeting my first friends, my first gay friends, and when I met one who was a drag queen, I was enthralled immediately, and I guess his name was David, I don't know, I'll pretend it was, but it was like a whole nother world to me, I don't even think he was all that fierce in his pictures, but like I remember asking him, and like my friends were protectively like, no, don't get him involved, and I was like, asking my friend, if I was a drag queen, what would my colors be? And he was like, Hunter Green, and I see you as a redhead. Did he see me as a redhead? I don't know, maybe not, but it was like, just the fact that someone saw this and it was a part of me, and then he was like, and wear a few layers of black and a couple of pairs of nude, pantyhose to hide the leg hair, and Hunter Green will be your color, and blah, 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 and I started playing around with, what would my drag name be? And for whatever reason, the first drag name I ever chose was Roberta Mystique. And like a bra and like sunglasses, and I was a drag queen. I was always playing dress up, but I didn't have any know-how about doing drag. But then I started visiting New York, and the first time I ever saw the movie The Beaches, and she was like, technically, I'm not from New York, I live in the Bronx. You live in the Bronx? I mean, what is a Bronx, And and I speak Spanish, and I was studying at the time, and I remember thinking, well, in Spanish, would they say La Bronx? La Bronx. La Bronx. Hi, I love honey La Bronx. God spoke it to me. And for the first time, I heard the name Honey La Bronx. I think I was maybe 19 when I first thought of the name. And and I knew if ever I was to do drag, my drag name would be Honey La Bronx. I hate most drag queens' drag names. I do. I don't hate my drag name. I don't think anybody hates my drag name. I think everyone thinks that Honey La Bronx is a fucking good drag name. And it is.
My last girlfriend dumped me January of '99, and it did really hurt her feelings. And then I told her I was gay. she got angry because we weren't having sex, and I was like, okay, and she was really upset, and I really cared about her, but I didn't have sex with her because I don't, not the place I wanted to go. And she was pretty hurt by that, and I felt like I needed to figure out what the hell was going on with me, because, it wasn't fair to bring people into my life in that kind of way. So I got a job at a gay bar to learn how to be gay. It was the end of February, and I decided after that experience with her and thinking about it on my 20th birthday, I thought to myself, you're gay. You need to figure that out. You need to explore that. So I got a job at a gay bar. I guess just to learn what it was to be gay. I mean, I'd never been around gay people before. I just didn't have any context for it. I remember there was this Denny's that everyone used to call Jenny's, and I'd sometimes find myself, before I came out, just kind of ending up there. And I was scared to death. I mean, I didn't know what to, how to be there. But I was intrigued and drawn and scared shitless of people, but I wanted to be around them. So I would go to this Denny's/Jenny's and just kind of peer into this world I felt like I was a part of. My first boyfriend, my first love, he was bisexual. And so getting a job at a gay bar caused me to go to the Denny's/Jenny's, and I had a lot of internalized homophobia and stuff, and I think I had a lot of trouble with my gender because I really wanted people to know that I was okay with people beginning to know that I was a man who liked other men, but I didn't want to be confused as a cisgendered, well now I have the terms for it, but it's like a cisgendered male or born male who wants to be female, or in other words transgender in some sort of fashion or another. I remember I was terrified of drag queens, and I worked at a drag bar, so that was really interesting for me, but I would literally run away from a drag queen. They would come up to me and I don't know, flirt with me like you do with a hot male waiter and stuff like that, and I was just horrified. I didn't want to be confused as wanting to be female, because I was well, I'm a dude. Yeah. So my first boyfriend was bisexual, and at that time I was, believe it or not, doing a little bit of drag myself, which was really crazy for me because, again, I was just trying to figure out being gay, and at the time I was underage, so I was old enough to the point where I could work at a bar, but I couldn't actually go to the bar. And for work we had to dress in drag, and once for opposite sex day around their anniversary, I came out and I looked amazing, like Jennifer Grey before the nose job. And all these club owners wanted to hire me to work in their club, and I was like, I guess this will get me into more gay bars, and I can be around more gay people and learn how to be gay. So I did that for a little while, and I performed at a couple different bars. And this was back when like Genie in a Bottle was really big, and Hit Me Baby One More Time, Britney Spears, and that sort of thing. It was just really fun. I tried to take it as like a theater role, because I still struggled with the idea that guys would hit on me as a guy would hit on a girl, would hit on me as a boy in drag. That was really confusing to me. My boyfriend, Alex, because he was bisexual, he was always trying to get me into drag to be with him, and I was just not into that. But our relationship lasted like a whole 3 weeks or something like that, But I was so in love. Like he was 27 and I was 20, and there was just something about 27 that I was like goo goo gaga over. It was like 3 weeks later, in May, and I went down and he told me that he had chlamydia. And he needed to go get treated or tested or something like that. Nonetheless, I drove him to the clinic because he was a 27-year-old who didn't have a car. That's a whole other story. Get used to that. So I drove him to the clinic, and while I was there, I decided to get screened as well because, we were sexually active and that's what we were supposed to do. So we paid her $10 and they got us back there. And they offered an HIV test, so I took an HIV test. That was the first time I had ever been tested. And back then you had to wait 2 weeks to get your results. So I waited my 2 weeks and I got my results, and I remember it took them a really long time to get me to go back over there. And once I finally went back there, I remember before the woman even shut the door, she said, "Positive." And I was like, what do you mean, positive? And she said, "Your test results came back and they're positive." What's that mean? And she said, "You have HIV."
As a white man, a product of the upper middle class, I've always been aware of racial prejudice, and intellectually deplored it, and hoped that I wasn't. I hoped I was making this better. My partner, before I met Mike, was named Norman. And Norman died of AIDS in '95. The last 2 years of his life, he lived in this beautiful apartment in Brooklyn. But progressively, as he got more and more sick, we had to move him to Manhattan so that he'd be close to Cabrini Hospital and Gay Men's Health Crisis and other resources like that. And the process of finding an apartment in Manhattan is never easy, but it took us 6 months, and we finally found this beautiful place on East 11th Street. The super was a Stonewall vet whom I knew. Ivan Bell, he was this fabulous person, drag queen. And Ivan was fabulous, but the process of finding this apartment was very difficult. Now, Norman was raised in New Hamburg, which is a little village on the river near Poughkeepsie. And we would go through this over and over with advertisements about apartments. We'd see something, and then we would go to the listing, and they'd say, "Oh, you're Mr. Williams. I'm sorry, we rented that apartment already." Well, after this happens a couple times, you kind of wonder what's going on here. It's come to the occasion when Norm was too sick to go look at the apartment, so I went by myself to one, and I was talking to the landlord, and I said, "Your tenant will be Mr. Williams, this is his ID and stuff, and his rent will be subsidized by the Divisions of Aid Services." The landlord looked boldly right at me and said, "I'm not having no AIDS-carrying nigger in my apartment complex." The other tenants wouldn't stand for it. Now, I was raised a wasp. Wasps, we don't make scenes. But I completely lost it. I started screaming at this guy, and I told him that I would sue him. And he told me, "Go ahead and sue. By the time this gets to court, your friend will be dead." And I had never felt like that before. I had never experienced such hatred, such meanness, such bigotry. So I went home to Norman, and I told him everything. And now Norman was part shaman, part Native American, and part Wiccan. And I thought Norm would get so upset about this, like me. Instead, he got very sad, and he said, I feel bad for that man because he doesn't have a heart, he has a little stone." And I think that shows that Norm was a better man than I could ever be, because that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to send him a plate of scorpions. But he got very sad, and it was heartbreaking watching this. So the next thing I'm going to tell you, and you can take this for what it's worth. 3 days later, the landlord from the previous apartment called us and said that we could have the apartment if we wanted it. But by that time, we had already found our place on East 11th Street, so we said thank you, but no thank you. And that was a transformational moment in my life. I mean, I'd had so many experiences like that throughout my life. Going back to Stonewall, I think I mentioned I wasn't at the Stonewall riots. I was in Boston, making an elderly banker a very happy man. But when I heard what had happened at Stonewall, I immediately got on the train, and the train got to Penn Station very early in the morning, and Christopher Street. That's where I hung out. I knew these people. I knew the people that were involved with this in some way or another. And so I got to the street, and it was very early in the morning, and there was debris and so forth, and smoke from a burning cop car. And out of nowhere, there was this this little boy, and he was sweeping up glass on the street, and he was singing this song from West Side Story. There's a place for us. Somewhere, there's a place for us. Take my hand and I'll lead you there. Some place, some time, somewhere. And that for me was the most transformational experience that I had ever felt. I mean, it overwhelmed me. And for that moment, I was just frozen in time because I realized there had been a place for us. There had been a time for us. And it was here. And it was now that had to be.
I remember I stared at her for a long time. I couldn't tell you what she looked like, but I just stared at her what seemed like forever. And after that staring, I said, well, is there any paperwork I need to fill out? Because I gotta go. So I filled out the paperwork. I had tested anonymously, so I had to retest confidentially with my name on it. So after I did all that and they took more blood and whatnot, I left. I was driving home when I got connecting about what HIV really was. And I mean, I didn't know anything about it. I hadn't been around gay people. I hadn't seen people with HIV deal. So the only thing I could think of was the movie Philadelphia, and that was fucking scary. I mean, and it just didn't make any sense to me because, I looked good. I felt good, How could I have AIDS? And I mean, I know it was HIV, but at the time they were the same thing. And I didn't understand because, there was really only that one time I could have gotten it, and it didn't make sense because now I was in this relationship and the first thing I did was I drove to my ex-girlfriend's. She lived in the same apartment complex as me and a friend of ours, Memphis, and we all worked at an IHOP together, and that's how we met each other. And I remember I just walked into the apartment and I was like, hey guys, I have HIV. And they hugged me and we sat on the floor and I whined and cried about everything I could think of from, I have AIDS, I'm gonna die, how could this happen to me? I heart Jesus, I haven't even had that much sex, I'm gonna die, and everything was just going back and forth in my mind. And that's what began to spark this whole thing that I was gay, and I was not going to be able to not share that with people anymore. I was going to have to share it with my family, and because in particular my HIV status, and because I grew up in a small town, and even though I resented just small town, it was just small. And because I was so close with my family, I felt like I needed to tell them. And I was gonna need them emotionally and physically. And also, I knew that if I didn't tell them, they'd be hurt if they found out down the road. So I caught the first plane back to Idaho. It was May 13th. Around the time that I found out is the day I call my anniversary. And I caught the first plane back home to Idaho. And the closest I could find was Salt Lake City. And a friend showed up and picked me up, but it was Mother's Day. And I planned that I wasn't going to tell my family on Mother's Day. You know, I was going to wait till the next day. I was emotional about it, but it wasn't Christmas or Thanksgiving, so it was kind of a weird time for a, you know, quote unquote college student age kind of person to come home. It was a trip, so they knew something was up. They knew I had some sort of announcement. I was really emotional about it, you know. I don't think I ever felt like my family would disown me or not love me anymore. I think I felt like they would be just really disappointed and sad by it. And I felt like I had let them down, like I had really fucked up, you know. I was like this smart, Jesus-loving, awesome, now attractive-looking kind of guy, and I was going to go out there and do amazing things, and now I'm just a faggot with AIDS, you know? And I really felt like I let them down, and that's all I could see it for. I was going to tell my mom and my dad, I was going to tell them the next day, and my grandma and my grandpa, and my mom and my dad's best friend, and my little brother, who was 17 at the time. I was going to sit them all down at once and tell them at once, so I'd only have to say it once. And then everyone who needed to know would know. And they would all have their support systems to deal with it however they needed. But it was probably like 10 o'clock the night of Mother's Day, and my parents were like, son, like, you need to tell us what's going on. You know, we want to know what's up. So I called my grandma and my grandpa, and because we grew up in Wendell, they lived across the street at the time, so they came over, and I told my mom and my dad and my grandma and my grandpa and my little brother. And basically I said, you know, I've been able to accomplish a lot in my life so far, and I've been able to do that because you've always been there to love and support me. And I hope that after what I have to tell you, that you'll be able to continue to do so. Because I have to tell you that I'm gay. And my grandma got up and she ran over to me and she gave me a big hug and she told me that it was okay. They still loved me. Everything was going to be all right. And I said, and I also have to tell you that I am HIV positive. And my dad stood up and he said, well, happy fucking Mother's Day. And he got up and left. And my mom cried, like I'd never seen her cry before. And my grandfather told me I'd just broken my father's heart. You know, I don't think it was a good or a bad response. I think it was to be expected at some point.
So, is there room at the table? Should there be room at the table for the dissenting voice? Is there a place at the table in our community for this pastor to sit along with us as equals? There is. There is, and you know, I think there has to be. We can't move forward unless we allow room for the people that need that education the most. And you know, that pastor from Lakeside, he kept inviting us every night to come to this conference, and we knew that if we stepped foot on that church property, we were going to be arrested. So we always said no thank you. But we went ahead and invited him to our question and answer session. And you know, he came. So did the other three pastors who spoke. And he stayed the whole time, that pastor from Lakeside. But when it was over, he was out that door like he was going to catch something. But those other three pastors, they all stayed, and they thanked us for sharing that perspective. So yeah, I think there is room at the table.
And are there other things that you've seen work to get people to come to the table?
Death does, oftentimes, sad as it is. When a child's first bully is their parent or their church, you know, I see a lot of that. And on a selfish note, you know, it requires so much grace to sit there and answer crisis calls from parents whose child is dying, and they were their first bully. And well, to go further back, while we were planning the Rally of Hope, we met up at a coffee shop, and one of the people who wasn't planning with us came up to me, and we started talking about the church, and I told him about our crisis hotline, and he took a couple of my crisis cards. He was a nurse at a local health facility, and I didn't think much of it. And then about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I got a call in the middle of the night. There was a child at this facility where this nurse worked who had taken a lethal dose of acetaminophen and was not going to make it. And this child was homosexual, and his parents were worried that he wasn't going to go to heaven, and he was going straight to hell. And this nurse stopped them and said, that's not right, and there's a gay affirming church nearby, and they will answer calls 24 hours a day, and I can have them come here if you'd like. And so he called me, and I came, and I sat with the parents, and I prayed with them, told them exactly what the Bible says about homosexuality, which is nothing. And they're sitting there, and they're dealing with new information, because death and going home should be a peaceful thing. And this child, the last 2 weeks of his life, his parents prayed over him and shouted Bible verses at him while he knelt in the middle of the living room. And it's not right. And going home should be peaceful. I guess maybe for this kid it was, but I can't imagine a world in which I would want to hurt my kids. If you're gonna beat the hell out of your kids, at least learn your facts first. Or better yet, don't. There is enough in this world that beats the hell out of our kids, and these people are relying on antiquated lies and dogma and something that some preacher shouts behind a pulpit on Sundays, and he's not even right. And they're dealing with this new information, and that's it. It's all a lie. And ultimately, that killed their kid. Ultimately, they killed their kid.
I think the most important thing is change. You don't change societies. You change individuals who comprise societies. I think what everyone should do is just live in this world as they are. To their family, their friends, their neighbors, be out. Just be out. And understand that you will be rejected by some. And if it's your family that rejects you, that's okay. Because then you get to make your own family. And sometimes those families are the ones that mean the most to you. I know that was the case for me. I'm not saying that my family disowned me. They didn't. It's just most of them are dead. But yeah, be who you are. Fly your flag. That is the most powerful instrument of change.
So I went out of the house and I took a walk around town just to kind of give everybody a chance to kind of, deal with it. And I think just to give myself kind of the chance to escape. Because, I was still challenged with it myself. And I came back after midnight and everyone was in bed and asleep. And I went to bed, and I got up the next morning, and my dad's always the first one up, drinking his cup of coffee, watching TV, getting ready to go to work. And I got up, and I went into the living room, and as soon as I did, he left. And that's just the way it was the whole week I was there. If I was in a room and he came in, I left. And if he was in a room and I came in, he left. My dad and I had always kind of had a strained relationship. I was very much, he was very much a sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of guy, and when he was 30, he kind of had to change a lot of that. But when he was 30, I was 12, and I was like, yeah, it's cool that you want to play that, but you know, I don't want to play it right now. So we struggled with that. Through the years, I've been able to see my dad as just kind of another guy like myself, you know, who's trying to do his best in his life and in his relationship with others. But my mom was a lot different. I remember it was the next day and we sat across the table from one another. And this is just a random side thing, but it was the table that my brother and I had gotten for Mother's Day years prior. And we were eating like a peanut butter sandwich or something like that, and potato chips. And I remember my mom looked over at me and she asked me what song I wanted to hear at my funeral. And I was taken aback by that, you know. And I told my mom, like, it's too soon to be asking about that. But that was probably one of the best things that my mom could have said to me, because what she said to me in that is that she was going to be there for me for everything. She was going to be there for me when I got sick, and she was going to be there for me after I got sick and ultimately died. And she was going to be there to make sure that everything was okay. Well, that I was okay, and that everything was going to be the way that I wanted it to be. And my mom knew that I would have a song that I would want, that I would care about. And the title of it was Good Riddance by Green Day. So I stayed at home that whole week, and then I went back to Arizona. And that's when I really began to like deal with things. You know, I ended up not being able to go back to church, which was really hard for me because that was my only other support group. But I felt like in being gay more than in being HIV, I felt like I wouldn't be loved or welcomed the same. So I chose not to talk to them about it. And then I began my stint with drugs and alcohol almost immediately. My dad gave me a hug when I left that time after I told my family. So I knew it would take some time. And me and my dad have, you know, not always seen eye to eye, and I'm now 34, yeah, 34, almost 35. So it's been a bit of time, and quite a few things have happened. Like I married a man back in 2003, and my dad wasn't there. He said he wouldn't be there. He said he wouldn't support it, wouldn't endorse it. And later on that year, I was in the hospital and I almost died. We actually did more planning around that time for my death than any other time in my life. You know, my parents had like looked at coffins and funeral services and stuff like that, but now I had a husband and someone else significant in my life, and that created like this thing that like, you know, like what my parents want to do with my body and what they want to do with me after death, and like what my husband wants. And because of this illness, not HIV, it was called ITP, that was gonna kill me. Immunothrombocytopenia purpura, something like that. It's basically a platelet disorder, where my platelets were being destroyed to the point where I could bleed out and die. And We later learned that my spleen was the culprit, was the thing that was destroying my platelets. So we had to get that removed. And when we went to go do that, I had to get a transfusion, and that gave me meningitis. So when I was in the hospital for that, my parents came to visit, and my husband was there, and he just took such good care of me. You know, he was kind of a bitch to the doctors and the nurses, just to make sure I was taken care of. And my dad saw that, and that made him happy. He even told my now my ex-husband, they drove down to LA to meet me at the End of the Road to Hope tour, and my dad told me that he kind of fell in love with Travis, that Travis was considered kind of a son to him. And my dad was able to confess to me that all he wanted for me in life was for me to be happy and to be loved, and for someone to treat me the way that Travis did, which he didn't understand. He doesn't understand the sex and still doesn't want to think about it. But he was happy that I was happy and loved somebody else. And when Travis and I split, when I left Travis, it was a really difficult thing for my family. You know, my family had spent a lot of time with him. So it's been quite a few years now, and I'm now a recovering drug addict and alcoholic. I'll have 6 years in May, around Mother's Day. I got sober on Mother's Day. And that's allowed me to have some really candid conversations with my dad about how, I felt about him, and that I loved him, and that some of the most important parts about who I am and who I try to be are things that he instilled in me. And regardless of feelings of lack of meeting my expectations, some of the best things about who I am in this world and who I try to be in this world are things that I learned from my dad. You know, my kindness, my generosity, my love, my lovingness, you know, that sort of thing.
So my final question really for you is, if you had one story that you wanted to tell, you might have already told it, but if there was one story you wanted to tell and you wanted to be remembered by, what would it be?
Well, I don't think it would be my story. My story hasn't been told yet. My story may never be told. I'm not that excited, but I think it would be Thomas's story, and all those kids like him. I mean, you know, I think it's wonderful that today that we have pro athletes coming out. I think that that's great, but people need to realize that, I mean, he's being embraced because he's a pro athlete. That's why he's being accepted. She's being embraced because she's a movie star. The kids like Thomas, they get sent to reparative camp and shocked. I mean, there's a guy we have here in the GSA, he just came back from shock treatment, and I mean, these kids are young. These are young kids.
You know, that shit should be illegal.
It should. You know, it wouldn't be my story. It would be Thomas's story. Thomas was the cutest, most wonderful kid ever. When I was in college, I had a coffee shop because I can't sit still, as you know. And Thomas used to come in, and he was a total Disney-phile. I mean, 17, started college at 16, total Disney-phile. And he would get real mad when I would change the lyrics to Disney songs to make them naughty. One time, I remember we had an open mic night, and I changed the lyrics from Under the Sea to Under CC as a joke. And he was just like a little ball of light. He was just such a good kid. And, you know, he was younger, so I used to bring him everywhere with me. And he maybe only went to like one Gay Straight Alliance meeting, because they were all just like very older and very angry and like, act activist, and well, you remember college. And he was just like, cha-cha-cha, cha-cha-cha, just like jazz hands happy all the time. And I remember it was December. It was right before Christmas break. And he came up to me and he said, Cece, I have something real important to tell you. And I said, well, what, sweetie? And he said, I think I'm gay. And I said, well, okay. And he said, well, tell me, do you think I'm going to hell? Do you think less of me? And I said, well, sweetie, I mean, I've known since I met you, and I still love you, and that's not going to change. And what happened next was my fault in a lot of ways. He asked me how his parents would react. And you gotta understand, I came from a family of a very strong single mother who would have loved us regardless of anything. I mean, my house was the safe house. My house is where my friends came and they practiced on my mom before they told their parents. So, I told Thomas his parents would love him. I told Thomas his parents would love him. And they sent him to an asylum. They sent him to a mental health hospital for 6 weeks. And when he came back, he was still happy. Still had a little bit of light left. And he was still gay, shocking. So they sent him to a reparative camp to pray the gay away. And he was there through the spring semester. And when he came back, 2 weeks later, he hung himself in the bathroom with his belt. And would have been this year he would have been 37. He was such a good kid. And I hope that somewhere his parents realized that they killed him. And I hope that they make peace with that. But I am just as responsible. Because I led him into an ambush. Because I thought that all parents love their children. Some just can't. You're an asshole for making me cry.